Good morning, everybody. Welcome to DevNation. I'm Brian Gollaher. I'm a Red Hat Platform Product Manager. I'm responsible for a number of things related to Red Hat Enterprise Linux, including our developer products. This morning I'm going to take you through a presentation about developing applications for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We're going to cover a bunch of things. We're going to talk a little bit about the Red Hat Developer Program, talk about developing Red Hat Enterprise Linux applications using the tools in base RHEL, talk about the developer toolset, about Red Hat software collections. I'll touch on software collection packaging and how you can use it. Then I'll talk about the availability of both the developer toolset and Red Hat software collections, and finally give you some information about some of the other talks that'll be going on this week at Summit and DevNation related to developing applications for RHEL. And finally, some last links so you can learn more information. So I want to start by talking about the theme or the vision of the Red Hat Developer Program. We call it balancing development agility with production stability. And this is more than just a marketing phrase. This is something we really believe in. And if you understand this, you understand what we're trying to do with our developer tools. When we say balancing development agility, we want to give you various alternatives for developing your application. Different tools, newer cutting edge tools, older stable tools, long life support, shorter life support, that type of thing. So you have the ability to select the tools you need for your application. At the same time, production stability. RHEL has 10-year lifecycle support. When you put a system into production, you want to know that something is stable, it's going to last, it's going to be supported for a while. So that's what we mean by production stability. So the theme of our developer program is balancing development agility with production stability. And you'll see how that works as we go through the presentation. I'm going to start by using a model that Gardner makes available called the Pace Layered Application Strategy. And I think this is a good way to look at the developer tools we make available for RHEL and understand where you use each one. If you look at the bottom row of this chart, you'll see what Gartner calls the systems of record. These tend to be back office applications, financial applications, long life applications. They often have a 10-year or more life cycle. These applications, when you develop them, you want them to be stable, obviously, for a long time. You want to be able to support them for a long time. You don't want security issues as you get into the later years. You want a very stable, well-supported platform. So this lends itself well to the tools that are built into Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Going to the top row, you'll see what Gartner calls the systems of innovation. These tend to be shorter-lived applications, prototype applications, proof of concept. They might be social media applications that are put together for a particular event. Relatively short life, plans persistence usually of less than 12 months. And these applications fit well into the model for our OpenShift platform. You can spin up a system, develop your app quickly, get all the latest tools, and get it into production very rapidly. Then in the center row here, you see what Gartner calls the systems of differentiation. These tend to be apps that companies use to differentiate their company. So if you're a shipping company, your logistics app might be a good example of this. If you're a chip design company, your chip design application might be a good example of this. These are applications that last for quite a while, 2 to 5 years, but when you develop them, you still, because they're important to your company, want to be able to use the latest tools available. So these applications fit well into the Red Hat Developer Toolset and the tools we make available in the Red Hat software collections. And I'll go into details on these as we go through the presentation. So let's talk about different ways to develop your apps. These are some of the options we give you with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. RHEL itself, both RHEL 5, 6, and soon to be 7, come with a native tool chain in base RHEL. You can use the native tools to develop all different types of applications. whether they be high-performance financial applications, web applications, database apps. Complete set of tools built into RHEL with the full 10-year Red Hat Enterprise Linux support lifecycle. So they fit well into that bottom row on the previous slide. Then we make available the Red Hat Developer Toolset. In the DTS, we offer newer versions of the GCC compiler, Eclipse, and some of the related debugging and performance monitoring tools built around C, C++, and Fortran applications. So if you've got one of those systems of differentiation type applications, this is a great set of tools to use for that. And I'll go into more details there as well. And then Red Hat Software Collections. These are new versions of the web development languages such as Ruby, Perl, PHP, new versions of some of the databases, MySQL, Postgres, MariaDB, available primarily for web applications where you have a choice of different runtime languages and some of the newer databases. So let's talk a little bit about developing applications on Red Hat Enterprise Linux using the native toolchain. Red Hat Enterprise Linux provides a compatible API across 3 major Red Hat releases. We talked about the 10-year life cycle for RHEL. So if you develop an application using the native tools, following some guidelines I'll talk about in a minute, your application will run across 3 Red Hat major releases. So starting with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, the current version of RHEL available today, if a change to a library during its life cycle causes an incompatibility with any of the existing code, a separate version of the library will be provided to the older ABI to run the application without modification. So we'll be offering compatible libraries with each major version of RHEL so that your application will continue to run. Here are some examples of what we call a compatibility level 1 library: glibc, glibc utils, GTK2, libgcc, libgfortran, libstandard C++. These are some of the libraries that are compatibility level 1. And I mentioned some guidelines. These are just some good rules for developing your application that will assure that it runs across major RHEL releases. So if you build your applications using only the published interfaces of a library, avoid static linking, limit linking applications to the core libraries at level 1, package as an RPM, and use a Linux file system hierarchy standard. Following these guidelines will guarantee ABI stability. So, you know, what this means, you build your applications today on RHEL 6, follow these guidelines, and then the applications will run on RHEL 7 and even later versions, as some of the developers like to call it, RHEL 7++ going forward. Obviously, you're limited to the features in GCC 4.4, which is the version of GCC and the library supported on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6. But to run on the multiple versions, you need to use the dynamic libraries that are available in that RHEL release. So if you want to take advantage of more of the later tools, beyond those that are available in base RHEL, we have the Red Hat Developer Toolset. The Red Hat Developer Toolset delivers the latest stable versions of GCC with C, C++, and Fortran support, as well as newer versions of Eclipse and the debugging and developer performance monitoring tools. The benefits of using the Red Hat Developer Toolset is you can use the toolchain versions best suited for your projects. So whether you have a short-term application with a short life or one that is expected to be around for many years, you can choose the most appropriate toolchain for that development. You preserve application stability with side-by-side versioning. So on the same system, you can run an application that uses the libraries from base RHEL, as well as an application developed using the developer toolset, all in the same system, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. And we support the components in the Red Hat Developer Toolset for 2 years, and I'll talk more about the life cycle as well. So getting into a little more detail, using the developer toolset to develop for the future, we offer the latest version of GCC libraries and tools, and we update the DTS with a major release each year. So we released the original version of the DTS for RHEL 5 and 6 2 years ago, based on GCC 4.7. Last year, we came out with DTS 2, newer version of the developer toolset, built around GCC 4.8. And later this year, you'll see the next version of the developer toolset developed around GCC 4.9. All of the features available in these new versions of the compiler can be used by the application, so we don't hold anything back. Anything that's in that version of GCC is available for your applications. And good thing about the developer toolset is applications built using the DTS GCC compiler run on the current version of RHEL as well as the next major version of RHEL. So an example of this would be using the developer toolset GCC version 4.7, say developing on RHEL 5 today. It'll run on RHEL 6. If you're on RHEL 5, moving to RHEL 6. If you develop an application today using the DTS2, GCC 4.8 on RHEL 6, it will run on RHEL 7 going forward. And you can test that on the RHEL 7 data that's available now. Here's a brief shot of some of the tools that are available in the Red Hat Developer Toolset version 2.1. 2.1 is the latest version. It was just released last month, and I'll explain how the lifecycle works in more detail in a minute. The core tools in the developer toolset are GCC, currently version 4.8, GDB, and bin utils. We offer latest version of the Eclipse IDE, currently version 4.3.1, the first update to the Kepler release. We offer Eclipse in the DTS for RHEL 6 only, though, not for RHEL 5. We will continue to make it available, though, in the DTS for newer versions of RHEL as we go forward. We offer a number of debug and performance monitoring tools: SystemTap, Dynast, DWZ, Valgrind, OProfile, ELFutils, strace, and memstop. And in the latest release of the DTS that released last month, we introduced a new version of Git, version 1.8.4. So, as we said, current version of the DTS 2.1 based on GCC 4.8.2, which is the latest version of GCC with the latest upstream and minor bug fixes. Latest version of Eclipse, updated to 4.3.1, which is the first maintenance release to the Kepler release. And in the DTS 2.0, which released late last year, if you're familiar with DTS 1, when we released DTS 2, we added some new components. We added Dynast, we added strace, and we added memstop. Some additional components in the developer toolset: SystemTap, OProfile, Valgrind, ELFutils, DWZ, and GDB. These are all newer versions of these tools than those that are available in RHEL. All of these, except DWZ, are available in base RHEL 6, just an older version that continues to be supported, stable version to go along with the current version of the compiler and the libraries that are in RHEL. And then in the DTS, we've updated them to these newer versions. As I said, DWZ is not in RHEL 6, but if you look at the RHEL 7 beta, I think you'll find it there. And as I mentioned, we added a new version of Git. Git is currently in RHEL 6.5, version 1.7.1. We've had a number of customers ask us for a newer version of Git, so we added Git to the developer toolset in last month's release, and we've updated it to version 1.8.4. So you have the latest version of Git now available in the DTS. Finally, some of the features of GCC 4.8. If you want to know what's new in 4.8, C++11 support, a brand new local register allocator that was actually contributed to GCC by Red Hat. improved performance. You can compile extremely large functions faster using less memory with GCC 4.8, and we added hardware transaction memory support. These are some of the new features in GCC 4.8. So how does all this work? How are we able to offer a new version of GCC on a system that also runs an older version? This is a pictorial to kind of show you how that works. You build an application with the developer toolset, and as you can see, it dynamically links to the libraries that are available in base RHEL. So it links to the libstandard C++, glibc, libgcc libraries. And then any new symbols that are available in the newer version of the compiler are statically linked to the application. So when the application runs on RHEL 5 or RHEL 6, say, it takes advantage of the dynamic libraries on the system, and then the newer features are statically linked to the application and carried along with it. So an application running on an existing version of RHEL can, if it was developed with the native version of the compiler, it just uses the dynamic libraries. It was developed with the DTS, uses the native dynamic libraries plus the static libraries linked to the application. If you want more details on this, we can talk after the session. There's also a developer toolset talk. I'll give you the time later. I think it's Wednesday afternoon that we'll dig in deeper to how the DTS actually works. Talk a little bit about the DTS lifecycle. It's important to note that it's separate from the Red Hat Enterprise Linux lifecycle. It's got its own independent lifecycle. We release the DTS once a year based on the new GCC upstream version. GCC typically releases the new version in the spring. We then test and package for the DTS and release the DTS in the fall. So this is kind of the cadence we've adapted now. GCC releases in the spring, we release it in the DTS in the fall. We support current and previous DTS major versions, so you get 2 years of support. We typically issue a minor release every 6 months to update some of the tools. And I mentioned before that in the last minor update, we added Git. So that's an example of how we do add things and update some of the tools midway through the release lifecycle. And just like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we offer Z-Stream releases for security fixes and any serious bugs that come up. Here's an example that should make the lifecycle clear. You can see the first year we introduce a new version of the DTS. In the mid-year we update it, then we support it through the second year with critical fixes and security updates. Then as we roll into the second year, we do the same thing with the next version. And this just keeps rolling year on. So that's the DTS. Now let's talk about Red Hat Software Collections. Red Hat Software Collections deliver the latest stable versions of the dynamic languages and open source databases for users to create modern applications that can be confidently deployed into production. So similar to the DTS with the GCC compiler, we offer Red Hat Software Collections, which contains a number of dynamic languages, Ruby, Python, Perl, PHP, for example. Just like the DTS, you can choose the runtime version that is best suited to your projects. You can use the native version. You can use an application on a system, RHEL 6 system developed with a native version of PHP, for example, as well as on the same system run an application developed with a newer version of PHP. And we support the languages, databases, and such in Red Hat Software Collections for 3 years. So it's a little bit different life cycle than the DTS. So what's actually in Red Hat Software Collections? In the first release, which occurred last fall, we introduced Ruby 1.9.3 to RHEL 6 with Rails 3.2.8. We added Node.js, 2 new versions of Python, 2.7 and 3.3, PHP 5.4, and Perl 5.16. We also updated MySQL and Postgres. And we added, for the first time, a new database, MariaDB, which is a database compatible with MySQL. These languages, as you can see, are updated more often than those within native Red Hat Enterprise Linux. They're all packaged as software collections, and it's important to note that we support these languages on RHEL 6, x86, 64 only. We don't support RHEL 5, only 64-bit RHEL 6. Going forward, Red Hat Software Collections 1.1. This is actually in beta right now. It's in beta for RHEL 6 and for the RHEL 7 beta. RHEL 7's in beta as well. So you can use any of these languages in Red Hat Software Collections on the RHEL 7 beta. New version of Ruby 2.0, Rails 4.0, and we broke them out into separate collections here. New version of PHP, so now we've got two newer versions of PHP than what we have in RHEL 6. We added a new version of Apache Web Server 2.4, and for the first time we added the Nginx web server. We also added some Java monitoring capability by adding thermostat and another new database. We've now added MongoDB. So MongoDB is available in Red Hat Software Collections 1.1 for RHEL 6 and for RHEL 7 beta. The focus here, as you can see, is on modern web application servers. Again, x86 64-bit support only on RHEL 6, and RHEL 7 is the x86 version of RHEL 7 is 64-bit only as well. The key benefits of using the components in Red Hat Software Collections: you can choose the latest stable runtimes without the effort and risk associated with installing upstream unsupported community versions. A lot of people wanted to use newer versions of some of these languages and databases, so they would take the upstream versions and run them. You don't have to do that anymore. You can get them right from Red Hat with full Red Hat support. Preserve application stability. As we've said, you can run the newer versions on the same system alongside the older versions. We don't overwrite any system files. I'll explain how we do that in a minute. So you can deploy the resulting applications with confidence. Red Hat Software Collection Lifecycle. This will look a little bit like the DTS, separate lifecycle from Red Hat Enterprise Linux. In this case, we do a new major release every 18 months, minor release every 6 to 9 months or so. Full production support the current and previous versions, and Z-Stream updates for security fixes and bug fixes. So this is what the release cadence looks like. You'll notice for Red Hat Software Collections 1.0, we introduced that last fall. We're in the process of doing that midterm update now, currently in beta. We encourage you to give it a try. Then we will support it for a second 18 months afterwards. And in Red Hat Software Collections 2.0, which probably comes sometime around this fall, we'll do more updates. So we'll try to keep, the popular languages, PHP, Python, etc., keep those things up to date every 18 months or so, and we'll be adding some other new components, some new languages, new databases, new database servers, other tools as well. I don't know if I made it clear, but the components in the Red Hat Software Collections are all runtime. They're all available both for developer systems as well as your production systems. A little bit different than the DTS. I want to talk a little bit about packaging, because this explains how we're able to offer the newer versions on base RHEL. We use what we call software collections packaging. So we use the term software collections to be a packaging, a structural definition for an application or tool set independent of the OS. We also kind of throw the name around because it's a RHEL channel or content set where we put a bunch of newer tools packaged as software collections. So you'll hear people say software collections referring to Red Hat Software Collections content set and also to the packaging. So the resulting packages, anything packaged as a software collection, can be layered on top of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Allows you to build and concurrently install multiple versions of the same software components on your system without overwriting any system files. We do it by installing the components outside the standard file system hierarchy. The SCLs go into the opt directory path. I'll explain that in a little more detail on the next slide. It's important to note that Red Hat Enterprise Linux, starting with 5.10 and 6.3, has included the packages to allow you to build, install, and maintain software collections. So whether you use our software collections or you develop your own, the tools to do this have been in RHEL for a good year and a half. And also important to note that software collections can depend on other software collections. So if you install, say, the Python software collection, you can build your app as a software collection and use the Python software collection. How does that work? This explains how software collections are installed. I've used GCC as an example here. So the system version of GCC installed in the user bin directory. The first version of GCC we offered in the DTS. You can see how it's in the opt.rh for Red Hat DTS1 directory path. The second version of GCC available in the DTS2 goes into the DTS2 directory path here. These are all separate tools. There's a special invocation to run them from your shell. You do SCL enable the particular collection, and then the components that you use well in that shell come from the software collection you've enabled. And as we mentioned before, the application life cycles are independent of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So that's what we have available for the developer tools and basically how they work. Here's a summary, which is probably a bit of an eye test, but it kind of puts everything in perspective. The tools in Red Hat Enterprise Linux in the DTS and Red Hat software collections. You can see the packaging that we use, the life cycle, and how they're available. To get the developer toolset, the current version available, as I said, is version 2.1. It was released last month in March. It's available in Red Hat Enterprise Linux developer subscriptions with the Red Hat Enterprise Linux Developer Workstation, as well as the Developer Suite, our partner NFR subscriptions, and our academic subscriptions. So if you want to use the DTS, any one of these subscriptions will make it available. They range from full enterprise support for a large number of developers down to a $99 package, the Red Hat Enterprise Linux Developer Suite, which is very affordable way to get Red Hat Enterprise Linux, all of the add-ons, as well as the DTS and Red Hat software collections for development purposes. Software collections, it comes with all the same subscriptions that the DTS does. It also comes with all supported RHEL server and workstation subscriptions. So these all have runtime. So if you're deploying either RHEL server or RHEL workstation in your organization, you have access to all the components in Red Hat software collections. To install it, pretty straightforward. If you're using satellite, generate a new cert, register your system, attach a subscription, add the channel, and then yum install the software collection. And as I said before, once you've got the software collection installed, it's relatively simple to run one of the collections. Just SCL enable the software collection name, and from that particular shell, that collection is available. It's also very well documented. If you look on the customer portal, we have a complete set of documentation around software collections how to build them, how to build your own applications, how to run them, install them. Very well documented. We encourage you to go look at the documentation. And that concludes the presentation. I'd like to show you some of the other related developer talks we have going on this week. Encourage you to attend the Dev Assistant talk. I'm looking forward to that one. You see software collections, go into a little more detail about software collections, both on RHEL and OpenShift. You see deeper understanding of software collections, available tomorrow, a couple beer and bath sessions, and then saving the best for last at 4:50 tomorrow, Developer Toolset, deep dive into Developer Toolset. Matt Newsom, who's engineering lead, will be giving that talk. Matt's actually in the back here smiling. I encourage you to all go and attend that for more information. Oh yeah, how about that? Actually, Slavik's here too, so most of the people who are giving these sessions are actually here. So hopefully I've given a good introduction on all these topics, and you can attend the deep dive to get the real serious meat. Any questions? Yes. We sure do. Well, the obvious ones are new versions of everything you see there. As we go forward, we'll be updating those. Well, it's available with the developer toolset. Yeah. Oh, actually, no. Actually, it's not available. It's uses a system version. Yeah, I've heard that, right? Yeah, we thought it was pretty straightforward that the software collections content set contains all the software collections, but you're right. It also uses software collection, and we're packaging more and more going forward as software collections. That's a good point, and I didn't mention this, but one of the things we found when we introduced software collections is a lot of our users wanted to extend the software collections. So some of the utilities that are available in Red Hat Software Collections 1.1 currently in beta make it easier to build dependent collections and such. And we encourage feedback. You know, if you use them, if you have some issues with them, and there's some things, you know, by all means, contact me. Oops, there is one more slide. Which are some of the links. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter, YouTube. Look at developer blog at redhat.com. Two of our most prolific, well, actually 3 of our most prolific contributors are in the back of the room here. Give us your feedback, because we do want to you know, make sure we offer the right collections and the right capabilities in those collections. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and encourage you to attend the other sessions.